Thank you, Dr. Banks, for that wonderful introduction. Again, my name is Aunica Cesena, and I'm on the schools track for UT's art education program. My project is called Teaching About Texas Freedom Colonies, an elementary collaborative claymation project. This project is one where it was research-informed, as Dr. Main mentioned, and applied with students at an elementary school in Austin, where I was student teaching. But before I get into the application of it, if you're like me and haven't heard of Freedom Colonies before this point, let me get into it. So, Freedom Colonies are places where a population of freed African Americans settled following emancipation and during Jim Crow. These settlements were places where formerly enslaved African Americans were able to build homes, shops, churches, and schools, and form self-determinate communities in a way that helped them narrowly escape the trappings of Southern sharecropping at the time. I found the independence of these communities very fascinating and very inspiring, and given that historical context especially of continued subjugation during a time like Jim Crow. When I heard about them through research in Texas being done by the Texas Freedom Colonies Project, a statewide counter-mapping urban humanities project located at Texas A&M University, I was really curious and I knew that I needed to know more. As I learned more about the histories of these places, I wondered how I could integrate their histories into an art unit that could be conducted with other K-12 students. The photos that you see on the screen right now are from a Freedom Colony located in Austin called Clarksville, whose history I'll go more into depth with later during this presentation. So, as I began my project, I was interested in seeing what I could learn about my own research, creative and learning process in facilitating a collaborative claymation video with elementary school students at the school that I would be student teaching at. I had, this project went in a few different iterations, and I eventually decided on claymation because I had taught it with elementary school students the summer prior, and so I just felt like it would facilitate the story learning that could be done in the classroom. So I think that a lack of knowledge about these freedom colonies, for me, really stems from the fact that Black history in K-12 education is often not given the time and attention that it deserves. When it's talked about, we often relegate it to 1 month during February, which is Black History Month, or the same handful of Black historical figures are retaught and retaught again. As Christina Chin had noted in the art education literature, there's also a tendency for art classrooms to not talk about race within the classroom, due to teachers either feeling underprepared, hesitant, or uncomfortable. On a personal note, as a Black and Mexican American person myself, I really felt like not learning about the histories of my communities within the K-12 education system and feeling that absent really left me lacking a sense of community pride for my roots and identities. And I think that this is something that can really be easily avoided through intentional curricular planning in the future. As the Garrett King argues, it is important that students see themselves represented outside of the hegemonic retellings of history. For my theoretical framework, I relied upon critical race theory. Critical race theory posits that most people of color continue to be routinely discriminated against or otherwise unfairly treated in both public and private spheres, as demonstrated by numerous social indicators. In my case, I was really interested in how racism has been codified structurally within the United States institutions in ways that perpetuate inequality along racial lines. This is why it was so important to use this as a framework for my project's foundation, and the series of lessons that I created served to address power dynamics and inequity by bringing awareness to prejudice while also promoting respect for and value of differences. This type of instruction is a form of social justice education, which centers around developing a social awareness of inequities along with a critical lens that encourages social action. So, to complete my project, I first had to conduct bibliographic research, and that really relied upon articles and books about freedom colonies. I was left wanting a more personal experience of these places, so I conducted 6 semi-structured qualitative interviews with those who either researched, lived in, or had personal ties to another Texas freedom colony in East Texas, called Shankleville. My goal was to learn about what made these places so special in Texas from the Texans themselves, especially as an outsider researcher not from these places. I wanted to to know what was unique and special in their eyes about these places, and what was important to communicate to K-12 students about them. The themes that were most prevalent were a sense of community pride for being connected to such a powerful lineage and history, an overall commitment to retain ties to freedom colonies, even if they lived in different places now, and a really big commitment to retain and share the history through preservation of place and through community event programming. The data that I collected ultimately helped me center my research and lived experience and guide it toward the Freedom Colony of Clarksville, located in Austin, which I felt would be really appropriate and relevant to the lives of the students that I was student teaching with. So a little bit about where I was placed for my student teaching. I was placed at Maplewood Elementary School, which is located in Cherrywood area. It was built in 1951, and the school's vision is to inspire every learner's imagination, innovation, and discovery. Their school slogan is to increase the peace by practicing peace character traits such as respect, communication, honesty, encouragement, and teamwork, which I felt was really fitting for my project. The racial student demographics at Maplewood Elementary for the 2020 and 2021 school year were 10.9% African American, 26.1% Hispanic, 54% white, 0% American Indian, 3.1% Asian, 0% Pacific Islander, and 5.9% 2 or more races. So a little bit of an overview of what this collaborative claymation project really looked like. The first thing that we were doing was learning and researching about this place called Clarksville, learning key dates and facts about it. Next, we went into a building and creating stage, so students got to storyboard their scene, they got to design their set and sculpt characters. The third component of it was to film and edit, so we were using iPads and an app called Stop Motion Studio. We got to add voiceover, add credits, and then finally we got to watch and celebrate all the creations. I started by accessing previous knowledge by asking if students had ever heard about this place, and if so, what they knew about it. There was one student who actually did have family members who lived there, so that was something I didn't expect, but it was cool to actually have that brought into it. I also went into a little bit of Clarksville's history. So Clarksville was founded in 1871 by a formerly enslaved person named Charles Clark, and he really envisioned that Clarksville would be a place for formerly enslaved African Americans to really build community and be able to practice their lives freely. We also talked about how in 1921, the City of Austin Master Plan was a document that was drafted because Austin was expanding so rapidly at that time, which meant that they wanted to expand into areas that weren't Austin previously to that, such as Clarksville. And in the 1921 plan, there's actually a suggestion to move African Americans in that area to East Austin. Terrible. In 1971, there were other developments that threatened the existence of Clarksville, such as the building of the Missouri Pacific Railroad, Mopac Expressway, I'm sure some of you have heard. And what this did is that it went and destroyed homes, unfortunately displaced several folks that lived in Clarksville at the time. We also talked about how there was activism against more of these actions. In the mid-1970s, Congressman J.J. Pickle and Clarksville residents protested another expressway that was going to be built and threatened the integrity of Clarksville, and they were ultimately successful in protesting away this new expressway, which is really exciting. In the 1970s, 1978, we see a lot more efforts within Clarksville to really retain the character of their neighborhood. A lot of gentrification is happening, and so a lot of folks create this organization called the Clarksville Community Development Fund, or CCDC, as a way to keep low-income renters in the area by using grants and loans in order to buy homes and make sure that they go to low-income renters. And finally, we talked about how Clarksville in the present day is on the National Register of Historic Places, which is really cool to see that recognized. The Haskell House that they have built is a museum to Clarksville's history, really dedicated to amplifying it. And the CCDC is continuing to have an affordable housing program, though the demographics of Clarksville have changed a lot since its majority African American demographics before. Back to the project. So we first established group roles and responsibilities for how we wanted to tackle this after we learned the history of Clarksville. And so students were encouraged to either take a role that really piqued their interest or they thought they would be really strong in, such as a video director who was going to be in charge of the iPad, an art director who would help sculpt, a writer who would come up with the sequence, and a set designer who would go and create the backdrop. Although they were set to assign one person, that was mostly just for accountability in a group project, but they were really encouraged to take on different roles throughout it. I also wanted them to reflect on what they were learning as they were learning about Clarksville. So we had discussions about that. We went into storyboarding, what storyboarding looks like. We went into what makes a good story, what's your favorite story, they got to discuss. We also went into the different elements of the story, sequence, setting, characters. These are the things I wanted to emphasize within the storyboarding process. Here's some pictures of the students working on both their sets and storyboards. Another thing that came up while they were working in these projects, they were set up and all working with their table group. And as we were going on, there definitely were cases where there were kind of strained conversations. People had differences in opinion, and so something that was really important to bring up is when these conflicts arise in our collaborative groups, what can we do about it, and how can we handle them in a way that's respectful to everyone in the group. We then went into character building. I don't know why the photo's not coming up, but oh, there it is. And these are some of the clay characters that other folks came up with. And lastly, we got into filming. I went over what Claymation is and that it's a type of stop motion animation. We're taking a lot of different photographs and stringing them together so that we get the effect of a video in the end. All of the different features of the app so that they would know what's available to them. And I really was interested in what they learned about themselves through the Claymation process. Some students had had experience with it, some hadn't, and so it was really interesting to see how they navigated either coming into these new elements or just getting to refine their skills. Lastly, we got to edit them together. Here's a photo of me going over the editing and the filming together. Put emojis over there. Cute faces. And then now I want to show just a snippet of some of the videos that were created. There was a lot of videos, so I had to narrow it down, but the sound not too loud.
The founding of Clarksville. Mr. Peace, Henry Sellers, and Charles Clark, a former slave, had just broken out of slavery. This is the story of how Charles Clark bought his land and put it all together.
I want to give my land to slaves.
I want to buy your land now. Land build!
Now we may stop children in the couple's home.
The end.
Yes, we have an announcement to make. Me and the Board of Congress have decided that we're turning your neighborhoods into an official expressway.
Oh no! What's bad? Later, Doctor. Oh my God, you'll never hear what I just heard. Yeah, we gotta go tell JJ people. We don't believe this JJ. They're gonna knock down the neighborhood.
Wait, what? I got protest.
One protest later.
La 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 la. What's up, bro?
I've been reading myself. Doing for the organization with me. It's called the CCDC.
I'm fine with that.
I got a guy that can approve our organization.
What you trying to get?
We're trying to start an organization called the CCDC.
Okay, I can do that for you. Asking more about
We're gonna buy houses and then sell them to people in Clarksville for cheaper.
Okay, we can do that. That's a good idea because it can help people in Clarksville. Ice cream?
They were really adorable. Everyone had a lot of fun and joy. Organizationally, a lot of students kind of struggled with like the planning process of it. Before getting into the clay, a lot of folks were like very much more engaged when that happened, and so because I split the history of Clarksville and the storyboarding into two different lessons, I think going back and redoing it, I would have definitely combined them into one, and instead of lecturing about Clarksville, I think I would have allowed them more freedom and opportunity to learn about the place themselves, just to have a little bit more fun investigating those things and being able to really find out the details for themselves, what was the most interesting to them. I also distributed it and had every single table working on a different point in the timeline. If I was going to redo it, I think that I might have a whole class working on one point in the timeline, just so that we could have more conversations about what might this event look like. Like, who do you think would be there? What do you think the setting would look like? Who are characters? And from there, we might be able to come to some different ideas creatively of what that could look like, just to add a little bit of more support, because that was one of the things that students kind of struggled with coming up with in the beginning. One limitation of this research is that I was only working with one elementary school, and I was only working with 4th and 5th graders, so I would be really interested to see a research project that continues this, but maybe works at a secondary level, and amends the lessons to see the kind of learning that they could do at that age group as well. Another limitation being the demographics. I did work at a majority white school, and so I'm really curious to see what this would look like if I was working at a primarily black and brown school. Just having these different lived experiences also influence the outcome and connection to the lessons. And finally, what I learned about my own research, creative, and learning process. I'm going to go back to my notes for this one. I learned that I really loved applied research. That was my favorite component of it. Although I loved conducting the interviews and doing the bibliographic research, it was really, really interesting to be able to take it into the classroom, and I think that once I started doing the lesson planning and working on the PowerPoint and working with students, I found a new love and commitment to my project that I hadn't had before. I also just really love to see the students come together and solve the problems that they were coming up against. Their dedication, patience, and resilience that they showed making these videos was really inspiring, and I know that certain aspects of it challenged them, but they really persevered through it, and we all created a video, which was awesome. It also, holding space for students who were struggling with seeing the beauty and uniqueness in the creations and artwork that they did, also helped me hold space for myself as I was kind of struggling with feelings of imposter syndrome around, is this lesson good enough? Could I have done it better? So that was something that I learned about my own personal journey as well. Yeah, and overall, conducting and carrying out this research really informed the sort of teacher I want to be in the future. Kind, patient, equity-focused, and social justice-minded in my lesson planning. And I really hope to continue being able to center issues of race and history within the classroom so that students can use art to process the societal complexities of inequity and eventually transform them. As a graduate student, I really hope and see a bright future for the study of freedom colonies, and I hope that that research is expanded to even show more nuance of these places' history. And finally, as a future art teacher, I hope to continue seeing more lessons focused on race and freedom colonies throughout Texas and the rest of the southern United States. That way we can show students the most accurate and authentic representations of this country's history. Thank you.